Hazel Bowen, welcome to the podcast. Great to see you today.
Great to be here. Thank you.
How are you?
I'm good, thanks. Really excited to be doing this.
Good. Hopefully you'll maintain that excitement. So the reason we're having this podcast today is it's part of the Future Fit series. And today we are focusing on leadership. And this is about ensuring that businesses are able to create an environment where everyone can thrive. And I think I'm really interested because you've got I want to see it from your lens and your perspective, because we are going to be touching on things like neurodiversity and the impact that's had. So I'm genuinely looking forward to this conversation. But where I would like to start is more of the beginning. Okay. So if I can sort of get in the time machine and bring you back to the past, and maybe you can sort of give me a bit of an understanding in terms of your background, where you grew up, your school, so I can get a real feel for you.
Sure, thank you. So I would say for someone who works in financial services, my background isn't that common, although I don't know that for sure, but from my personal experience. And that is that I come from quite a poor family, sort of the lower end of working class. And I grew up in Norwich in Norfolk, went to state school for the first part of my life. And just to provide context, because I think if you say, like not wealthy or poor or however you want to describe it, people can think different things. But for context, I lived in a household where we would run out of electricity, not have hot water, didn't have central heating, that kind of stuff. So, that end of the scale. And fortunately, I'm very academic. And so although I went to some schools that were in more deprived areas to start with, I got a bursary to go to private school when I was 11. And that, I think, has had a very big impact on who I am now and the path of my life. Not for the reasons people might expect. People might think that's because I got a great education and therefore had more opportunity. But I think because of the experience of being somewhere where you don't automatically belong and where other people have opportunities that are through circumstance as opposed to necessarily skill or meritocracy, which I think has set me up quite well, if I'm being brutal about financial services, so early on for working in financial services. So yeah, I struggled quite a lot at school, even though I was very academic, because although I didn't know at the time, I was autistic. I am autistic and have ADHD. And when I was at state school, with the people I was around at the time, my challenges went really unnoticed because being late for school, not having any pencil case or, not being prepared was quite common because there were a lot of children who lived in households where they weren't well supported anyway. So comparatively to say the children who turned up 2 hours late without shoes, like my issues were non-issues. And the fact that I was a very academic meant that that was what people saw. When I moved to private school, naturally, more of the families who send their children to private school are very invested in their education. They have quite a lot of structure around them at home to make sure they do their homework and things like that. So comparatively, suddenly, I was the child who didn't have my PE kit, didn't do my homework, was a kind of like the naughty child, although not from that perspective. That wasn't what I was intending. The other thing about going to private school, coming from a non-affluent background, is that up until I went to that school, I didn't realise I was poor because everyone was poor where I lived. And by the way, I should say I don't feel any sort of resentment for the fact that I'm poor and other people have money, or was poor and other people have money, because my household was full of love, and love is more important than anything. But when you suddenly are in a place where you realise that you can't afford more than one pencil case a year, so you better not lose it. And other people have horses and they don't understand why you can't ride a horse and, why you don't have nice clothes, why you can't invite people around your house. It's quite difficult. So I went through an experience of feeling, as I say, like I didn't really belong, and that made school harder. So I didn't get a very good education at school. I missed a lot of school, partly through being overwhelmed and not feeling well enough to go in, partly through skiving off school when I was older and could get away with it because I didn't want to be there. So when I was, as you would probably expect from that kind of history, I wasn't predicted to do very well when I was doing my GCSEs at school. And I got terrible results in my mocks. I was predicted to fail most of my exams. But it was kind of a turning point for me, which I think is something that I carry through my life, was, how could I let myself down? How could I let my parents down, who, whilst they hadn't funded me to go to the school because they couldn't afford it, they had done everything they could to make sure I could go on the school trips, and who believed in me. And it just felt wrong to not fulfill my potential. So one of the benefits of being autistic and ADHD is that you can have incredible hyperfocus when something matters to you. I knuckled down for 4 months and transformed my results and did really well. But as I say, the school years were quite difficult. And there were a lot of lessons that I learned there. And I think it wasn't the education that served me well, but the lessons learned. For example, one of the lessons I learned there was that I would have to back myself, and I wouldn't necessarily look the part or have had the training that other people have to appear right for a role. A really good example is when I was at school, we were asked by our music teacher if we wanted to join the cathedral choir. And I wanted to join the choir, and I was probably about 12. And so it's like really not a big deal if you're not that good, I don't think. But I spoke to our music teacher, and he looked at me and said, I don't think you're really what they're looking for, Hazel, comparatively to other girls in my class. And it wasn't, I couldn't sing. I can sing. I have a nice voice, but I'd never had any training. So, and that was because I came from a poor family. Like, singing lessons don't exist in a council estate. And so people have different backgrounds, have different resources to be successful. So I went along anyway. I auditioned. Unfortunately, the choir mistress thought, yeah, she can do this. So that's really nice. And I learned a lesson early on that people are going to think you're not good enough because you're not quite the finished article. You have to back yourself. And I also think that lesson I've taken into leadership, where when I look at people around me, I don't just think, well, are they the finished article? Does this person marry up to this like one standard that people think we should have? Where is their potential, and what have they gone through to get to where they are, and how much more have they got in the tank? And so I think that's quite an important lesson that I learned.
How do you feel about sharing all of this? Because some people are quite closed, aren't they, with regards to their background and what they've been through. But you seem to be, very open from the off. So when you're sharing that, how does that feel? And would you have done this a few years ago?
I feel totally okay sharing it because I think it's important for representation. In fact, I was at a networking event not that long ago having a conversation with a gentleman who, I like to go into deep conversations. It's just like, I don't want to talk about the weather and the football, not that I'm a fan, but that kind of generic stuff. It doesn't interest me. I like to go into deep conversation, and I sat down and had a chat with this guy who I've not known that long about our childhoods. And I said to him, I was like, this isn't the sort of thing I would normally talk about with someone who I don't really know in the professional context. But I was saying to him, I think it's important because if we go from a different background into what I would consider a sort of a profession that is typically for the affluent people, other people like me won't know this is where I've come from, and other people like me won't have a role model. You can't be what you can't see. So if I assume a persona of someone who is, well-to-do and never had any challenges and came from like a more, sorry to use class terms, but it's just the easiest way to describe it, a middle-class background, then I feel like I'm not doing justice to where I came from, not helping others with their, social mobility. So it is difficult. I can feel it's difficult because I can feel it in my body when I talk about it. I feel my emotions quite somatically. But you have to do these things because it's important.
Yeah, you do. And it's, thank you for sharing that.
That's okay.
So if looking back, what would you say through your childhood and your schooling, what was the biggest lesson that you learned?
The biggest lesson that I learned is not to listen to other people when they say you're not going to be capable of doing something. And that you've got nothing to lose by taking a chance. Those are the biggest lessons that I learned. When I was doing my GCSEs, my headmistress said that I wouldn't get the grades to go to university. Oh, no, I wouldn't get the grades to go to do A-levels. So I didn't listen to her. I didn't listen to the choir master who said I wasn't good enough to be in the choir. I just think that it's important to be defiant of people who try to limit you, because we should only be limited by our beliefs on what we think we can do, not other people's beliefs. And I also think we should try not to limit ourselves too much with our own beliefs as well.
Yeah, totally agree with that. And you went to university?
No, I didn't.
You didn't go to university?
No. So I got the grades to go to do my A-levels. I didn't want to stay at the school I was at. I went to do my A-levels. I dropped out in the first year and I got a job at a bank. So yeah, I had such a difficult time at school. It was not a place where I wanted to be. And I'd also been around people who had the means to do nice things, and I didn't. And so I wanted to go out and earn money and have a good time, which I did.
Okay. So you got a job into the bank. That's the start of your career. So how did you end up in the profession then?
So I got a job in a bank in mortgage processing. So at the very bottom as a temp. I really enjoyed being in the outside world, being around a whole diverse mix of people. And although I found school very difficult, it was because it was quite overwhelming for me, and the context of school, the social context of school, not the ability to do things. So I loved going into work. I loved the fact that I was good at work, and I could socialise with people, and I was unequal to people there. So I very quickly progressed because I worked hard. I was given opportunities to go into, I started in processing, went into do PA, then got a secondment into mortgage e-commerce support. And then that team was being reduced in size. So I moved to a mortgage research company, did mortgage research for a few years, did my mortgage exams. Never wanted to work with people. So, and I guess probably with the new lens I have of being autistic, and for context, I found out just last year that I'm autistic and ADHD. I did in the past, and probably still do naturally, find social interactions quite awkward. I've worked really hard to make that not the case. But at the time, I didn't want to deal with people. It was just a absolute no. So people had said you should work in sales. People had said you should, do mortgage advice. I was like, absolutely not. But I did my mortgage qualifications, and then I realised that I had all this knowledge that people around me would benefit from, and I wanted to help people. It's in my nature to want to help people. So I bit the bullet and went into mortgage advice anyway. Did mortgage advice at an estate agency. That wasn't my cup of tea because it was very high pressured. Went into an IFA, did mortgage advice there, and then was exposed to the world of financial planning and realised that, first of all, it would be more intellectually challenging to do the whole range of financial planning, but also the idea of helping people along a journey of their life was really meaningful. So that's how I got into financial planning.
Excellent. Okay. And talk to me about leadership then, because different experiences, different managers, this is pre-diagnosis as well. So what experiences sort of have shaped you in your understanding and views on leadership?
So I've had various experiences of good and bad leadership. Let's be honest, most people I think have. So I have quite strong views on what I think a good leader is. I subscribe to the idea of servant leadership, which I'm sure you know this, but for the benefit of people who are listening, servant leadership is where your team is not there to serve you as the person in charge. You are there to help them be the best they can be. And I think by taking that approach, obviously you're there to help your team be successful. And if your team are successful, you've done your job well. So that's kind of my philosophy of leadership. But I think also, if you think about leadership in general, you don't need to be a manager to be a leader. And I have naturally found opportunities to lead throughout my career, not with any sort of specific plan, but because it came naturally to me to think we need to get everyone working together. People need to have a sense of a combined purpose, and it makes people happy. People have belonging. Belonging is something that's very important to me, and probably from the context I just explained of my school years. When you don't feel like you belong, it's a very lonely place. And so I think making sure everyone in a business feels like they belong is really important, and you get the best out of them. So that also feeds into my leadership style.
Yeah. Okay. Because we're going to talk a bit more about servant leadership, and I'm keen to understand a bit more, because I think there is a balance to be had from that as well, because there's always a two-way street in management and leadership. But I want to understand a bit more about, if I can, the diagnosis, the process that you went through, because obviously you've been very honest about it. This is where I found you 9 months ago, where I watched your video and watched it again. I found it to be very authentic, and as I was listening on the train down today, I was learning again about you in terms of the emotion that you have as well. So I know I've got some preconceived ideas, but tell me about the diagnosis. I guess the question I need to ask is, what prompted you to seek a diagnosis?
Okay, so that's again, I'm going to share very openly, because it's the true answer. I had a miscarriage in December 2023, and January 2024. It kind of spanned over New Year, and the outcome of that was that suddenly I went from feeling very happy and confident and being able to spin loads of plates and absolutely loving what I was doing, to feeling like I just couldn't do the things I used to be able to do overnight, in terms of just keeping myself organized and not getting overwhelmed. And I think people around me thought I was grieving, and I knew I wasn't. And that sounds really awful, because I felt at the time I should have been grieving more. I have since found out that people who are autistic tend to have delayed emotional processing. So I knew it wasn't grief that was making me behave differently. It was something physical, but I didn't know what it was. And I wanted to do something about it, because it's obviously the logical thing to do is try and find out. So I took myself to see a psychiatrist and said I'd wondered if I was maybe autistic in the past, because sometimes I get blindsided by internal politics, because I see the world in I'm kind of very sort of straightforward. And sometimes I think I had experience in the past where I thought, why do people behave the way they do? Am I very strange for not behaving like those? But it'd only been a mild thought. But I went to see this psychiatrist because I was like, if there's something wrong with me, I need to know what it is. And I spoke to him and I said, have I got OCD? Am I autistic? Do I have bipolar? These were all the things that were going through my head. And he brushed past autism and said he probably didn't think I had autism. And he said I probably had OCD and I could have bipolar. Bipolar is where you, for people who don't know, it's where you are either depressed or very happy. Unipolar is where you're just depressed. So he said I might have unipolar or bipolar.
Wow.
So they're quite, I should say it's quite common for women who are autistic to be misdiagnosed as bipolar, because, are you happy for me to explain this? I think
go for it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So with autism, and you've touched on emotions and your misconceptions, I think that perhaps, we don't, and a lot of people think autistic people don't have that much emotion. We do, we just don't display it in the same way. But with bipolar, you have these really extreme ups and downs. And with autism, you can feel very strong changes in your emotion. And I would say this is very oversimplifying it, but the difference is that if it's bipolar, it's because of a chemical difference within you that creates that, just like depression. Whereas with autism, it's because you are responding to a world that you find overwhelming. And so you can be overwhelmingly happy. I love something that's called autistic joy. I can be one of the most joyful people in the world. And I love that part of me. But I can also feel very intense, sad emotions. And so it's very easy for people who don't have knowledge. And historically, the whole medical profession didn't think women were autistic. So they didn't consider that. Therefore, it was like, well, they're behaving like this, they must be bipolar. So anyway, I got this potential diagnosis of bipolar, and I was going to be put on medication for it. And medication for bipolar is quite strong.
Yeah.
And I just didn't believe I was. So I'd also been referred by this psychiatrist to a psychotherapist. And within my first session with her, she said, has anyone ever said you might be autistic? And I was like, no, apart from me. And it was just a wonderful moment because I felt really seen. She happened to work with autistic children, so she could see my thought processes and my behaviours were much more relating to me trying to make sense of social interactions than an inherent sort of thing inside me. So that's how it came about. Sorry, that was quite a long answer. And I sort of started that journey middle of 2024, found out early 2025 after I went for a then formal diagnosis. And it was in the formal diagnosis that they said, actually, we think you've also got ADHD, which I'd never considered.
How long was the diagnosis process then?
So I'm very lucky. I put myself through privately. And I know there can be really long waiting lists, so that's a huge privilege. The diagnosis process was it was a couple of months, and it involved 3 sessions with me where I went through various tests, had various conversations with a psychotherapist or a psychologist. And they also looked at my school reports from when I was young, spoke to my parents, spoke to my husband about my behaviours so that they could get more context about me.
It's quite detailed then.
It's very detailed.
Yeah. It's not just one consultation and...
No.
Yeah, okay.
Much more detailed than seeing a psychiatrist, which is like a 45-minute consultation and then they diagnose you, which I think personally is quite insane. And probably why people get misdiagnosed.
Yeah, that's mad. So when the second diagnosis, when that came, how did you feel? What was your emotion?
Relief, huge relief. I was so concerned about what was going on for me. I was like, if I can't find out what this is, what am I gonna do next? So it was a real relief initially. And I think a lot of people do, from what I understand from conversations and things I've read, that people expect quite a lot when they're diagnosed. So I expected that once I had this diagnosis, things would be so much easier because I would be able to explain to others that this is why I was the way I was, and people would understand. And this is something I touched on in that post I did, which was, whilst I had the language to explain myself to people, you can explain something to someone, but you can't make them understand. And so I was really taken aback by the fact that whilst I could say I was autistic and explain my communication differences, either people, I don't think necessarily took it seriously because I'm still very good at masking my differences. And I also kind of got from some people, okay, well, great. Well, now you know that you're different. You can work on that. And it wasn't meant in a horrible way at all. But the idea that you can, if you know something about you, you can fix it. And I think there's a huge misconception in that, particularly with people who've got ADHD, for example, and obviously autism. You can't just change the way your brain works just because you know your brain works differently. And I like to use analogies. And I like to use ridiculous analogies because I think they nail the point. But if I had one leg, if I knew I had one leg, I couldn't make myself grow a new leg. Like, I couldn't think myself into regrowing that part of my body. I know that sounds like quite a ridiculous analogy, but my brain is actually structurally different and I can't think my way out of it. And I think that what people forget is, or what people misunderstand, is that when people think of something that's going on inside your brain, they think of it as going on inside your mind, and they're not the same thing. You know, your brain is an actual physical organ and your mind is like a concept, isn't it, where you have thoughts. ADHD and autism are not your thoughts being different. They are a physical thing. So being told that I'm going to suddenly be able to change myself for the benefit of others so that no one else has to do any work to kind of meet me in the middle was quite a tough thing. And I had to stand my ground quite a lot and say, well, no, I've been doing that all my life. I need other people to kind of meet me in the middle here and understand how I communicate and like take me on face value because that's who I am, whilst I'm always trying to not take people on face value because I know that people, typical people, often beat around the bush and stuff like that. I'm making that effort. You make an effort for me.
Wow. Okay. Right.
Sorry again. There's so much.
So much to unpack there. I was probably thinking about the brain and the mind thing because I think that's quite interesting anyway in terms of, you know, what is the mind and how do we feel. Let me give you an alternative scenario. What if you went to see the doctors, the medical profession, and their diagnosis was, Hazel, it's just the way you are. You're a wonderful woman. The way you think is the way you think, but there's nothing wrong with you at all. How would you have felt?
Well, it's hard to say because that's not what happened. Something about me is I find it quite difficult to put myself into a situation that doesn't exist yet.
Yeah.
So let me think on that. I think I would have just continued to struggle.
So it was liberating then. It was freedom. It was,
Yeah.
that diagnosis, it sort of meant a lot to you. You could put things into perspective.
Yes, I could. And I also was able to get the right information for my brain. So, yeah, because a lot of people think there's no point having a label for something, particularly if you can't fix it. And I actually think when I went back to the psychiatrist and asked for a referral, because I had to go back to him, the one who dismissed the idea, to then get my referral to the psychotherapist to have the psychologist to have the assessment. And he was like, yeah, well, you did show some signs, but we can't do anything about it. So I didn't see the point in pursuing it. But if you go through life thinking you're... So a really good analogy or story is the ugly duckling. Everyone knows the story of the ugly duckling. Well, most people probably do. For anyone who doesn't, it's like there's a cygnet with a load of ducklings. Obviously, all the ducklings are cute and yellow, and the cygnet is like grey and is out of place. Now, if you go through life thinking you're just an ugly duckling, it's really hard because you're just not good enough. But if you realise that you're just a good version of something different, it's really liberating because then you can find your tribe. So you can, if you want to, go out of your way to meet other people who think in the same way, which is just kind of nice and relaxing. I've not actively done that because I enjoy everyone's company. So I think labels are quite important so long as you don't let them completely define who you are.
And that was the next question, really. It's about the labels with regards to, when can a label actually enable someone to flourish? And actually, when can it be limiting? And how do you get the balance between the two?
I'm still working on that. So I think for me, I'm glad I got diagnosed as an adult, even though my childhood years were very difficult. And so it's easy for me to say that because I'm still here as an adult. So if I'd had the diagnosis when I was younger, I think it probably could have been a path to not push myself so hard, not learn to have social skills. Whereas I did all those things because they were necessary. And it's put me, I think, in a really good, strong position as an adult. I think labels are limiting if you choose to make it your entire identity. I say that's a contentious thing to say maybe, and if anyone who's autistic or ADHD is listening to this, I don't mean that in a minimizing way. And I think some people would think I've made this my identity for the first year of being autistic and ADHD, but it's frankly just because you're like, wow, I'm seeing everything through a different lens. And I'm coming more out the other side of it and being like, no, I'm still Hazel. But I think they're necessary at the moment as well from a legal perspective, because getting things like reasonable adjustments, it would be lovely if every business just wanted to help people, but sometimes they don't know how, and they need to know that actually they have to in order to be able to be pushed to do it. So I think that's quite important. But hopefully there'll come a time when it's not necessary to have a label because it's so common that everyone's like, yeah, autism, whatever.
Yeah, it's just accepted and it's off we go.
Yeah.
I was thinking about this question. I was pondering whether or not to ask it, but I thought, why not? I stole it from another podcast as well, which is interesting. But it's on the theme of labels anyway, because normally when we introduce ourselves by our name, our qualifications, what we do, labels. If you were to remove all of that and you were to meet somebody, how would you introduce yourself?
How would I introduce myself? I don't know. Ask me to introduce myself and I'll see what comes naturally. Pretend you've just met me.
Hello, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
Tell me about yourself.
I'm Hazel. I'm 39. I love to experience joy. I think the world would be a wonderful place if adults didn't have to pretend that they were serious all the time and could still mess around like kids, whilst also doing serious things that are productive in society. I love music. I love dancing. Tell me
See
about
that?
you.
Yeah, because that's you, isn't it? That's because you started off with your name and your age. It's a label, and then you talked about joy, and then you talked about fun, and then you talked about music, and that's when the real person shows up. So this is why I always find it. Not that I disagree with having labels, because I'm listening to what you're saying. It's been liberating, but I'm also conscious that sometimes these things can be, from an employer's perspective, could be weaponized as well. That everyone's got a label, everyone's got mental health, and it's very difficult for businesses to try and navigate that. And I try and look through the labels and try and understand the person. So when I interview people for my business, it's like, I don't want to know your name. I can see that. Tell me about you. I want the essence of you, because that means someone can then just reflect and go a little bit deeper than just the base level. And you were saying earlier on that you were having conversations at a networking event, which was far more deeper than just what's the weather.
Yeah.
That's the bit I think we should be talking more about, to really understand where people come from, as opposed to tell me your qualifications and all of that nonsense. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. I don't know why people don't have more deep conversations. It's my natural style, so it's just what I do. People can meet me, and by the end of a half an hour conversation, they'll know quite a lot about me, and I'll know quite a lot about them. Because I think once you open up, people feel like they have permission to do the same. So I can't put myself in the position of someone who doesn't want to do that. It does make life much more interesting. I'm sure I do meet people who definitely don't want to do that, and I don't gel with them.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. Thank
The
you for
other
asking.
thing, can I just add one more thing on labels though?
Yeah.
Because another thing that I think, just a different way of looking at it, is that if you don't have a label, if you're not in one of those, I'm going to call it groups for the better way of putting it, you automatically have a label, which is normal. And I don't like to use the word normal, and I don't mean that in to say that people who are atypical are not normal, but just using it as what I think is the actual factual definition of normal. Normal is in the majority, what's the standard. And so if you have no obvious differences, and obviously everyone is different, but I mean differences like having a physical disability, being in a minority group, whatever it is, you don't need a label, because people assume you are what you are. And people, I think the benefit of having a label is people assume I'm typical, and because they assume I'm typical, they receive my communication style through a typical lens, and then they don't understand who I am. Does that make sense?
Can you give me an example? Because that's interesting.
So a really good example is something I have, looking back in my career history. If I look at the difficult experiences I've had in all of my jobs, I would say my challenges have usually been with people who are in charge. But I know it's
leaders.
I know. And it's purely, I think, through misunderstanding. Because of the way I think, if I'm in a meeting and someone is going through, say, a new project, or we're launching a new process, or whatever it is, there's some new initiative going to come into a business, and I can spot a gap in the information, or something I think might be a problem, I will just ask the question. And I would ask it very directly. I'm not going to soften it around the edges, like I think potentially women are expected to do, or people who are just, talking to someone who's more senior. And because some people might do that to challenge, I think actually from what I've been told, it's quite common that if people are asking a question in a room full of people that's, might be quite difficult, it's not for the same reasons that I have. I ask the question because I want information. And I don't do passive aggressive. If I want to be difficult, then I'll just be outright difficult. It's not something I tend to want to do.
So you're not playing politics here. You just want to get to the information.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I know, looking back, and also because people have told me this, when I've spoken about it, I've had people say, well, they think you're trying to undermine them. And I'm like, but I'm not. I just want information. And I think if people understand that if I want information, I'm going to ask a question, it doesn't mean I don't respect you. And also, it's okay to not know the answer to my question. Then people can receive me as who I am, instead of receiving me through a lens of something else. Another good analogy is, I think, so the thumbs up sign, obviously in Western society, is like a positive thing. And I think in some other cultures, it's a really, really rude thing to do. It's like giving someone the finger. And if, like, I was in the culture where giving everyone a thumbs up was a nice thing, but everyone else was in a culture where that was a terrible thing to do, but no one knew that I thought it was a nice thing to do, people would just think I was horrible because I'd be like doing the equivalent of giving someone the finger all the time. And so it's like if you see it through the lens of a cultural difference, I think it's easier to understand. And so that's why people need to be able to understand different cultures, and we know we need to understand different cultures so that we can receive people as they intend to be received. And I think that's the same with people whose brains are wired differently.
Yeah, okay. So inner cultures then. So it's not just, different countries, it's understanding people. So where, from a leadership perspective, I think generally in the people that I speak to, I don't think we are well equipped. I don't think there's enough training. I don't think there is enough conversations about this. I also find from the other perspective that when you are a leader and you are dealing with very difficult situations, it's very tough. You don't know what to say because you are conflicted. You've got the genuine concern about the individual. You want the individual to feel that they can show up and be themselves. You've then got HR saying, well, what about policies? You've got to do this. You've got other people in your ear saying, well, if you do that for that person, you've got to do it for that person. So I think from a leadership perspective, I think it's quite hard.
Yeah.
And I've written a post on this that because mental health, if we just use that phrase, has been sort of bandied about, I think the pendulum has swung a lot with regards to the employee. So the automatic thing is the employer will think about the employee, but running a small business, you've got to think about, well, how do I keep the lights on? How do we keep the workflow? What happens in this, situation? You've got cash flow issues. You've got all of this, and that doesn't really get sort of discussed about as well. So I think there's an understanding from both perspectives, because I think it is quite hard. But from where you are, what should businesses be doing so we can actually start to understand each other, as opposed to perhaps tick box exercises, go on a course and do that? How can we actually start to raise the awareness where we start to really understand people and stop the bullshit? Just get to the root cause and have proper conversations.
Well, I think actually you've hit the nail on the head. Just have proper conversations. I think leaders, managers can be time poor, and also if they've been in leadership for a long time, and have not necessarily come across a situation, be that neurodivergence or any situation, but they, particularly though with neurodivergence, if they think they understand people because they've been managing people for a long time, and then they come across someone who they suddenly don't understand, I think being humble enough in your capabilities to recognize that actually you might have just come across something that you don't understand, take away your bias and be curious as to what that person needs. I definitely think too much assumption is made. People want to get to the solution too quickly or not at all. And the reason for things gets missed. And if you can communicate with curiosity and say, okay, well, you're telling me you need this adjustment. What's the reason that adjustment is important to you? Help me understand, what in particular is important about that. As an example, I don't want to go too specifically into some of the things I've sort of experienced, but when I was trying to get adjustments at my firm, which I got, I was very specific in the way I asked for one of my adjustments, which was about having a desk. And it was, I wanted to have a conversation with my manager to talk about the best place for me to be sat and then have my own desk in that place. So I had thought a lot about the process I needed to go through to get that adjustment, not just I want a desk, but I need to make sure I'm in the right place because I needed psychological safety. There were lots of reasons why I wanted that desk that were, you think it's just a desk, but there was multi-layered reasons why that was important for me. It was like the routine. For my ADHD, it was so I wasn't being distracted by the constant change. For my sensory issues, it was because I have quite a strong sense of touch. Autistic people have quite high sensory feeling, so you can smell more and hear more.
Oh, right.
I find
I never
it.
knew that.
Yeah, it's so I can hear like electricity and plugs when I'm feeling
Can you?
particularly tired. Yeah.
What about sense of smell? Is that heightened as well?
Yeah. Sense of smell, sense of touch. Like, for example, if I'm wearing socks, sometimes they feel like they're literally cutting me off at the ankles, even though they're really not. And
Wow.
yeah. And I know it sounds really intense. It's like, have you, I think it's Hans Christian Andersen that did The Ugly Duckling, and I think he also did The Princess and the Pea. And I think quite a lot of his stories, actually, you can look at them through a neurodivergence lens. But like, I've often been referred to in my family as the Princess and the Pea because I could, I could feel the pea at the bottom of all the mattresses. So one of the reasons for having my own desk as well is like when you hot desk, and I can feel the dirt on the mouse. Sorry, I know that's really gross, but you hot desk and things aren't that clean, and I can feel it. But also there was I wanted to be sat with the right people who were part of my tribe, who are doing the same role. Like, no one could get any of that context if I'm just putting down, can I have a desk? And so initially I was just offered, I'd said I want a conversation to decide where I'm going to sit, and I was just offered a solution that wasn't going to work. And I was like, actually, please really listen to what I'm saying, because I'm being really thoughtful about why I'm asking for this. Can we talk it through? Because I need some help to understand what I really need. I need to have a conversation out loud so that I'm not just thinking about this in my head. And that's what we then did. And then we got to exactly what I needed. And I mean, coming back to the commerciality that you're talking about in terms of businesses worrying about keeping the lights on, my performance improved hugely after I got my adjustments, like phenomenally. No one could deny that if you looked at how I was performing prior to my adjustments, and particularly while I was going through the process of trying to get them, because it was incredibly emotionally draining, to how I performed just by having my own desk, which obviously the company doesn't usually have to buy because they already exist. It was commercially so worthwhile for everybody to just get that done. So I think really have proper conversations to understand where the person's coming from, because if you assume that they want something for a particular reason, you're probably going to make a mistake along the way and no one's going to be happy. You might buy a piece of kit that someone doesn't need. But also, it's probably commercial to do it. I think that gets missed. And the other thing, you're talking about small businesses. I don't know how much you know about the reasonable adjustments process, but reasonable adjustments it's quite defined what that means. So for an adjustment for an employee, for it to be a reasonable request, it has to be helpful to them, not put other people in danger, and be affordable for the business. So a large firm would be expected to do more than a small firm, but affordability for the business does come into it. So, but ultimately, if someone's going to perform better, it's usually a good thing.
I think my past experience with reasonable adjustments, they've always been quite reasonable. It's never really been, I want a different office somewhere else. So it's always been quite practical, but there is a process that you go through. You have to speak to HR, you have to create a policy, and if you do it for this person, you are, Sarah, my HR lady, she would always say, oh, you're setting a precedent if you do this, she's
But
quite
what a great precedent to set.
I
You're setting
know.
a precedent that you're going to help people who have challenges so that they can perform to the best they can be. Sorry for interrupting.
No, it's interrupt away. It's absolutely fine. But my view is I'm pretty relaxed with these things anyway. Running a business is a privilege, so you just want the best for people. And I just say, look, I have a very, very clear rule in my business, and it's just don't take the piss. That is it. Okay, I know that is subjective, by the way, and it can be labelled as such. However, it's a case of don't focus on other people. Focus on yourself.
Yeah.
What can I do to help you achieve? How can we work together? As opposed to he's getting that, I'm not getting that, and it's like, well, we're never going to get that. But what do you need? And I think it is taking the conversations to a next level. But again, from a leadership perspective, if I was preparing for somebody who is, you say about proper conversations, how could I prepare for that conversation practically? Because I'm an overthinker. So even today, thinking about this conversation, it's like, right, okay, don't say that. I overthink.
Mm-hmm.
And it can be quite draining.
Yeah.
So by the time you get to the meeting, you're absolutely knackered anyway. So from a practical perspective, if you are working with somebody who has been diagnosed with ADHD or autism, ADHD, or you just suspect, how can we prepare better?
So I think actually less is more, particularly if you're going to exhaust yourself preparing. And I say that as autistic people tend to overthink all their interactions in advance and then analyze them all afterwards. So I know what it's like to be exhausted by your own thoughts. I think going into a conversation with curiosity and not listening so that you can provide a solution, but listening so you can understand. And I know that's something that gets thrown around all the time. I don't think enough people actually do listen to understand, because we do want to be efficient. And because as the manager in that position, you're probably thinking, I need to help this person, but I also need to make sure I tick all my boxes so that I don't do anything wrong. If someone was talking to me at that time, it's new to me too. So just talk me, just open question, like, Hazel, tell me what this diagnosis has meant to you. Start probably at the bottom, and the things you're struggling with, which we're not going to judge you for because everyone's different and we know you're great at X, Y, and Z. And I think actually that's quite a nice thing. Those things I struggle with. I struggle with things that other people find easy, but I'm also, and as are many autistic people without learning disabilities, I have areas where this is not modest, but it's true, I'm exceptional, where other people are average. And so the thing is, the exceptional things don't matter if you can't remember your phone charger or remember your door pass, because those are the things people notice and you feel very judged for example. So if you can have a conversation and say, we know you're really good at all these things, so you can be completely open about the things you're struggling with, and we really want to help you, but we need to understand because we're not knowledgeable. We don't want to say the wrong thing. We don't want to get it wrong. You then just really setting the scene and providing context for a human conversation. And just, the typical things that you get taught in, questioning styles. And what else? And what else? I mean, I do that with my clients.
It's a great question.
It's a great question.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
You can ask that question 5, 6 times and get more and more and more.
Yeah.
And I think having that conversation, going away and reflecting on that conversation, and then coming back to trying to find solutions, I think that would be a good way to do it. Because also through conversation, me as an autistic person, an ADHD person, and as a human, I process my thoughts. All people, I think, process their thoughts differently when they're saying them out loud. So I might be having that conversation. And it was, in fact, specifically why when I wanted to sort out where my desk was going to be, I thought about it. And I was like, no, I need to have this conversation out loud to work this out. So the conversation will probably help that person understand themselves better. It will help you understand them, go away and reflect, and then come back for some solutions. I would say that's the best approach.
That's good, isn't it? It's quite basic as well.
It's so basic.
Yeah,
it's great.
You don't have to prepare for everything.
No.
Because I think sometimes it can be difficult because that there are some people that like a certain communication style, other people don't. So when you're doing a stand-up presentation, again, from a leadership perspective, it could be quite daunting and quite difficult because you're like, well, I know Bob over there, he doesn't like direct stuff, but Sarah over there, she quite likes the direct. So it's trying to get the balance. And I think sometimes maybe the conclusion I've come to is I think you need to know what your own through line is as well. You need to be comfortable with with who you are, as opposed to, and I think you've said this, wearing a mask.
Mm-hmm.
So where are you now in terms of the mask wearing? Are you still wearing a mask a little bit, or is it totally ripped off and I'm Hazel, this is who I am?
I'm going to come back to that.
Okay.
Just because one thing I should have said in the last thing, have an agenda. If you're going to have that meeting with that person, give them an agenda. Even if it's just, we're going to have an open conversation. Agendas are really important. Sorry, afterthought.
So on that, do you, again, little things like, if I was to email you and say, can we have a chat later on? And I don't say what about.
Oh, I'm thinking I'm going to get fired.
Yeah. It's a mad thing.
I've had a complaint, something terrible is going to happen. Yeah. Which is insane because I know I'm good at my job and I'm probably not going to get fired. So can we have a conversation? It's going to be about this. Is great. And if you're having a meeting that's like a meeting where you are going to talk about, even if it's something like we're going to talk about this new process, I would say it's always good to have, we're going to talk about this new process. The objective of having this conversation is X, and bullet points roughly are how we expect to structure this conversation. Now, I actually don't say that just from an autistic perspective, but it's really helpful for businesses to be like, we're having a conversation to try and achieve this outcome. And this is something I have said recently in a podcast that I've been on, and I say to loads of people, the adjustments that I ask for, like having an agenda, are actually sometimes very good business practice. And it's because as an autistic person, I have a very logical mind and I like to be prepared for a meeting. Yeah. Well, actually, being logical and being prepared are not bad things. So
Yeah.
you can get very good business outcomes by introducing some of the things that I would like as an adjustment for everybody. Like give everybody an agenda before a meeting. Everyone will probably be a bit better at their meetings if you do it. What you asked me a question about
Don't ask me to remind you, because I completely forgot.
masking.
That's it, yeah.
To be honest, getting my diagnosis has been, and it's the same for lots of people, and it's such a difficult thing to articulate because it sounds very dramatic, but actually it is quite a dramatic thing to happen. I don't know. I'm going to use an analogy as if I know what these people would feel like, and I don't. So I'm making an assumption that finding out that you're autistic and ADHD later in life is a bit like finding out suddenly that you're adopted. Now, I don't know what that's like. So that's a big, heavy caveat to that.
Yeah,
but what I'm trying to get across is you had an identity. You probably weren't happy with it because masking doesn't make you happy generally. But suddenly it's gone. You're like, who am I? And it really, I'd gone through that. So I write a lot of poetry to process my feelings. And some of the poems I wrote last year is like, who am I? And it's interesting reading them back now as to be able to see a diary of how I felt. And then you want to drop the mask. But obviously everyone masks to an extent, because we have our professional mask. And so it's like, well, if I drop the mask, is this appropriate? Like you have to find that balance. And it's almost like you have to find your own boundaries again. I would liken finding out you're autistic or ADHD a bit like going through puberty, where you're just like going through loads of change and you have no idea how to handle it. That's what it's like. So have I dropped the mask? To an extent. The most important thing is I'm more comfortable being myself now, and that is allowing me to work out what the mask is and what is me.
Are you happier now?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm much happier. I don't get upset with myself when I do things that are wrong. Sorry, anyone who's just listening to this and not watching it, I just did air quotes around wrong. I've had a situation before when I was really direct with someone at work. I like to be clear, like generally I'm not like that with people who are more junior because I try to soften myself because I think that's an appropriate thing.
So you can adapt your communication style.
Oh, absolutely. I can, but it's really exhausting.
Yeah.
So I adapt my communication style for my clients. I adapt my communication style for people who are reporting or working in a sort of, not necessarily reporting into me, but doing something for me because I don't want to come across as harsh. The times I realize I don't adapt my communication style upwards. And that's something that I'm reflecting on as I understand this, because I reflect a lot. I don't adapt my communication style upwards because I feel like, well, someone more senior than me, and this is probably a really basic way of thinking about things, they should be capable of handling my direct communication because fair
point.
They are higher up in the hierarchy. They can handle this. Obviously, actually, everyone's a human, and I need to probably rethink that. But I can soften my communication, and I do. Not always, because still sometimes some of my things my clients really like about me is that I will be quite direct. But I ask permission and I provide context. But it's exhausting to do it all the time. And so I don't want to have to do it with everyone, and therefore the people who I think should be able to handle it, I will be more direct. And also, generally, I'm more likely to have a difficult conversation with someone in charge because they're the people who are in control of my career progression. They're the people who are in control of things that really matter to me. And when something really matters to me, I like to be absolutely clear on what I'm saying without providing loads of fluff that might make the message unclear. Anyway, the point I was making was that I had a conversation with someone who was more senior than me in the business, not my direct line manager, where they'd done something. I wasn't quite happy with it. I'd been quite direct about it. Not, by the way, rude, just I told them that I wasn't happy with it and why, because that's how you learn. But I felt awful about it afterwards. And this was before I knew I was autistic and ADHD, because I felt like I was going to be so judged for that. And women in particular are not supposed to behave in that way. That's a whole different conversation. And I called my line manager and said, look, this has happened. And I've had this conversation. And I just need you to know, one, that this has happened and I'm not happy about it. But two, this is the conversation I had. And my manager at the time, he was so nice about it. he was like, Hazel, you're not comfortable with how you just had that conversation. And I was like, no. And he's like, you just need to be comfortable with who you are. And it was one of the nicest things.
I was going to say, that's class.
It was, because that stayed with me, that I have to be comfortable with who I am. And
But that's not training, is it? That's somebody inherently thinking, you just got to be you. Just be comfortable. That's not somebody who's been on a training course. You know, that's, I don't know, emotional intelligence, life experience, who knows? But to me, that's innate. That's somebody saying, that's just you. Go for it. Be fine with it.
Yeah, it was so nice. And that has stayed with me. And that was like a few years ago. And I think that, and the fact that, well, now I'm finding out who I am, because some of the things I believed about myself are not correct. And first, some of the things that I thought were just personality flaws are actually physical differences in my brain. That's really nice. So now I'm like, okay, well, if I am going to be direct, I've got to be okay with that. And actually, that's one of my values. So I am okay with it. And I'm kind of linking back my behaviors to my values. But also I can tell people that I'm like that, which really helps. So like, I am going to be going into a leadership role, and I've met some of the team, and I've told them that I'm direct, and I've told them why. And I've said what my values are. And I'm like, and by the way, if I'm ever not aligned to those values, call me out, be direct with me. And I feel like because they are expecting that, they will find it easier to see it through that lens.
Set the tone. Because you talk about clarity is kindness, don't you?
So clarity is kindness is one of my mantras.
I was going to say, it's a natural link. So talk to me a bit more about, clarity, because again, in leadership, you are conflicted. You're going to get issues of confidentiality. Life's full of just context and nuance, isn't there? Mm-hmm. But when you talk about clarity of kind, what do you mean by that?
So I think I've worked in various companies, big and small, and I have experienced myself and seen happen with other people, messages being delivered too softly, or people being expected to read between the lines, myself included, which I'm not very good at. And it results in confusion and disappointment. And if someone is trying to be soft in the way they deliver a message because they don't want to hurt someone, perhaps they need to give them some feedback that's going to be hard for that person to hear, but it's actually important feedback they need to be able to improve. But the person softens it because their discomfort with being unkind. That person may not learn. That could become a bigger problem. Or certainly I know that there are things that, whilst I don't want to hear, they're really helpful to hear. I had a trainer say to me that when I was doing an observed meeting once, that I asked a client, do you have any questions? And I don't like observed meetings. I was quite stressed.
How horrible they are.
Yeah, I really don't like being perceived. It's something I find really difficult. And he was like, you asked her that question in such a quick and direct way. I think she was probably taken quite aback by it. Have you got any questions? As if it's like you're asking the question, but you don't want her to answer it. And I was like, wow, that feedback hurt. But I was like, but you're absolutely right. And I've never done that again.
Yeah.
Whereas if he hadn't told me that, I might have carried that on and that wouldn't have been good. So I think that was clarity is kindness. But I think in much bigger examples, you can have messages that are given where you think people aren't ready to hear this message right now.
Why do we soften things up?
Well, when I've had this conversation with people tend to say, the people who are softening things, it's because they don't feel that people are ready to hear the message. That's a nice thing to tell yourself if you're softening something.
Yeah.
My belief is that we are not comfortable because we want to be nice and we want to be liked. And we're not comfortable, as people generally are not comfortable being unkind or feeling like we're being unkind. So we want to soften the message for our own benefit. And then we tell ourselves it's for someone else's benefit.
We convince ourselves it's for them.
Yeah. But it's not kind because it's easier to deal with a situation that you understand than be confused by a situation that you don't understand. And actually the long-term damage of being confused by a situation or not getting the right feedback and getting snippets of information that perhaps contradict what you were told in the first place, creates mistrust. And that's just a really bad thing in any sort of business environment. So clarity is kindness. It's kinder on the person that you're communicating with. It's kinder on yourself in the long run, even if it's difficult.
But would you say clarity is kindness, but again, it's how you communicate it. You've got to have empathy.
Yeah.
You can't be just,
You can't just bulldoze in with
that was terrible.
No.
I'm being clear. That was awful. The worst ever role play I've ever, So you've got to be, I guess you've still got to be genuine. You've still got to understand who your audience is and communicate in a way that they'll accept that.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you what I did. I don't know if you'll find this interesting, but I had I have been using AI for about 3 years now as one of the first people to start playing with it. And then I could understand that it could recognize patterns. So I was like, all right, recognize me. So I went through a process of, with the various platforms that I use, I said, right, okay, now ask me questions so you really get to understand me. I want you to understand my programming, my patterns of behavior, the things, because I've been having conversations with you for 2 years. So let's go deep. So it was like one boring Sunday afternoon, it's raining, and it came up with 5 elements of what it recognizes my patterns over a 2-year period, plus the questions that chat had asked me and I had answered. But it also went deeper. It said, that surface, go deeper, go deep. Why did you feel like that? And it was quite interesting to have a mirror shown back. And part of it was being quite intuitive about how people feel. I still won't act on that situation because I'm waiting for I'm explaining it away. It's almost like they're feeling like that or they're acting like that because of this, that, and the other. And I'm creating this mask, and it's not right. I know it's wrong. I've seen a behavior. I should tackle it, but I'm protecting myself because I don't want the conversation either.
Yeah.
So I found that, I don't know if anybody else would be interested, but I found that really interesting because that's my pattern of behavior. So understanding that has really helped me. And every morning it says, just remember your operating system, and it's great because that's almost like my programming.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, it is.
I'm sure anyone who's listening to this totally wants to go and do that right now.
Scary as well, because a lot of what we do is like subconscious programs, isn't it? We just do these things, and I'm trying to understand, why do I do that?
Yeah.
Why do I soften a message when you've got to be straight with people? But I also think with clarity, it is about responsibility. And I know we've had this conversation about being liked or being respected. I think your view is to be respected rather than liked.
Yeah.
But I think we just want to be liked.
We do. I actually don't think you can separate. I guess you can respect someone without liking them. I can't speak for how everyone else feels about that. But I will I value people being honest. I respect people who are honest. And so I will probably like people that I respect by default. I feel like you're more likely to be liked, truly liked, if you are respected, as opposed to just being someone who people get along with and rub up well with, but might not really like you that much behind your back because they don't respect who you are. And I've seen that in my career. People who are very charismatic, very charming, who people, rub up really well with, but actually would have a conversation about them, say, actually, I don't like this thing about that person. I don't like this. I would rather be someone who, frankly, if someone didn't like something about me, they told me to my face. But respected me enough to tell me to my face. And then I know who likes me and who doesn't. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sort of, yeah. I think it's hard. And I have this conversation with my daughter. I said, in life, you want people that you can trust. And they are the people that will tell you the truth.
Yeah.
And that means sometimes that you will fall out with people. But over time, they'll come back to you because they know that you are the person that will tell them the truth and you've got no agenda.
Yeah.
And I think, but it's hard at the time, especially my daughter's, just turning 17. So that's hard. And I think we've got this propensity, we just want to be liked. We just want to soften things up. But actually, I think what people really need is the truth.
Yeah. I think it's interesting because I definitely know that I can be a Marmite character. Some people really like me, and some people really don't like me. But there is this group of people, I would say, who are in the middle, who really value my opinion, but sometimes find me quite annoying. But it's true. I've definitely got two people in mind specifically, again, managers from the past, who I know really value my opinion because they know I will give them the honest opinion. I think that if any manager, I will say this because I'm like this, and I think people should value this in me. So I guess this is not a modest thing to say, but if any manager has someone in their business who's more junior, who's prepared to tell them the truth, that's a really valuable thing to have, because I don't think managers get it often. I really hope that when I'm managing people tell me the truth. But I've had a couple of managers, one who I worked with him and his wife said to me, he really values your opinion because he knows that out of anybody in the business, apart from his business partner, you're the one who's going to tell him the truth. And yet he and I butted heads a lot because I told him the truth. And I'm okay with that because I feel like that's I don't see butting heads with people as a bad thing. It's just you can't agree on everything. And I've had another manager who asked me for my opinion on a presentation that they gave when I think they knew they hadn't given the best presentation, and everyone else had said they'd given a good presentation, and they asked me, and I was like, it didn't seem, and I said, do you want my honest answer? I said I got permission, which meant I think if someone says, do you want my honest answer, they're prepared for you to say something.
Yeah. Especially with you, Hazel. Yeah, you know it's coming.
I was
Two
like,
barrels here.
Well, it didn't seem like you'd prepared for it that well. And so I think you probably, I felt like you had wasted my time a little bit, and that was a bit disappointing. But I don't think anyone else would have noticed. And
Jeez.
And at the end of the day, you could do so much. I only noticed because I know you can do so much better. So I feel like I softened it to an extent.
Do you know what?
You might think that's really harsh.
I would absolutely love you in my business, my presentations. It would be brilliant. But that's what you need to hear, though. It's not comfortable at the time, obviously, sometimes giving that or even receiving, being the recipient of the information. But if you want to become better, and one thing I know that in business, we need to be more productive and we need to become more efficient, faster, and we need to get to the truth quicker, and we need to stop this pretense. And so this is where I was going to talk to you about diversity of thought. We need people who think differently.
Yeah.
And I know diversity it's used in, again, it can be weaponized, and it's just always the extremes. I've always felt that you want people who are different to you. And I think that's the strength of the business. Mm-hmm. Diversity of thought. I think it's so important because the one term that I used to like, that I now don't like, is like-minded. Yeah. I don't want like-minded. I don't want people like me. I'm unemployable. Don't employ me. I'll ruin everything. But this is it. I think sometimes it's like that herd mentality. Let's have like minds. No. I want people who are utterly different to me, that see things in a different way, where I will come up with a creative idea and say, I think we need to do this. And I need somebody to go, as you would say, bottom up and go, that is a break there.
Yeah.
And I would find that frustrating.
Yeah.
I'd be like, Hazel, stop it. You're
bringing me
down. You're bringing me down. I don't want to do that. I'm over here. But you need that. If you don't have that, your ideas just fall anyway.
Yeah.
So I think this diversity of thought, again, that's what it means to me in terms of people who are completely different in terms of how they show up. What does it mean to you?
I completely agree with that. I think diversity of thought is so important because no one way of thinking is the right way of thinking, and no one way of thinking is going to get the best outcome. Because if someone has a great idea and everyone else thinks that's a great idea, they don't have a detailed conversation challenging it. And, I know I've come up with good ideas in the past that actually have then been implemented so much better because people have said, actually, I don't think that bit works, but why don't we do it this way? And I would rather have something that, I thought of grow into something better than just, things be done my way. And I think, that just is how every business should operate. Again, I think one of the challenges with diversity of thought is that people don't feel comfortable with debate sometimes, or what I would call conversation. I had an interesting conversation with someone, again, someone more senior than me, and we started having a conversation, and he said to me, "You're debating with me again." And I was like, "But I'm not debating. I'm just having a conversation." And we've had various conversations like this. We know each other quite well. And he knew I was going to say that before the words came out of my mouth. I think he even ended my sentence. He's like, no, you're just having a conversation, aren't you, Hazel? I'm like, yeah, I'm just having a conversation.
Yeah.
You see it as a debate because as a non-autistic person, this feels very abrupt to you, but I'm just bashing around an idea.
Yeah.
So I think because people aren't comfortable with the different communication styles, they find difference more challenging. That's why diversity of thought, I think, something that is uncomfortable. And I think it's why people like, what did you say, cultural fit?
Like-minded.
Like-minded.
Yeah.
Like-minded. People like like-minded because it's comfortable.
It's easy.
It's easy. And when you said like-minded, the words cultural fit came into my head. Because people look for a cultural fit, and I guess that's kind of the same sort of thing. And a lady who I was speaking with recently, who was on a podcast, she said we should be looking for cultural enrichment, not cultural fit. And if you think about it, things are more interesting. You enrich something when you add more to it. To, if you make a fruit salad, the more different types of fruit, the more tasty
like a
it is.
recipe. Yeah,
Exactly.
Absolutely.
So it's, if you think about it like that, if we can add someone who's maybe hasn't got qualities in this area that we typically like, but has all these other qualities that we don't have, that's enrichment. And I think that's what helps with the thought process around why diversity matters.
Yeah. We're coming towards the end of I was just looking at the timer there, the podcast. Is there anything that you would like to go back on, reflect, discuss, something you haven't mentioned that you would like to before I do my final few questions?
No. Well, I don't know what your final few questions are going to be. So let's go with those.
Right. Here's the reveal. 2 questions then. I guess if someone's watching or listening to this podcast, what message do you want them to take away? I assume they're in a leadership capacity.
We've covered it, but it's such an important message. It is be curious and leave your experience and bias at the door. Something I've seen time and again, both in terms of like dealing with people, but also in terms of in financial planning, in terms of giving financial advice. And sometimes the more experience you have, the bigger your blind spots become. And we've all heard of being unconsciously incompetent, consciously incompetent, consciously competent, and then unconsciously competent. I think most people have heard of like that.
I haven't heard of that before, no.
It's like, so it's about when you're learning something new.
Right, okay.
You know, first of all, if you haven't thought about learning it yet, you're unconsciously incompetent. Then when you're thinking about learning it, you're
I get that, yeah.
consciously incompetent.
Yeah.
Then you become consciously competent because you've worked at it, but you're thinking about how you do it.
Yeah.
And then you're unconsciously competent, a bit like riding a bike. A bit like driving a car, actually, because I think a car analogy works really well for this. So people who have been in management a long time can become, as you would expect, should become, to an extent, unconsciously competent. They're competent at what they do and they don't have to think that hard. But when you become really overconfident with your competence, I think you can go back to being unconsciously incompetent, where you think you know more than you do. And it means you're not curious enough.
Yeah.
I've had an experience actually where I've had a very new manager. I have had a very new team leader working with me directly after I'd found out I was neurodivergent. And because he was new to leadership, he was trying really hard and he was brilliant. He listened to everything I said, didn't make assumptions about what I needed, and responded to what I told him I needed from my leader. And that was the most wonderful outcome for me in the situation I was in. And that's because he was trying to be consciously competent. Whereas I've had experiences, as I say, not just in the neurodivergence thing, but just in general, where I've been talking to someone who's perhaps been a financial planner for years and they think they can predict the future about something because they've been doing this job for like 20 years and of course they know everything. And it's like, oh no, you are literally unconsciously incompetent right now because you can't know that because that's something that's not happened yet. So I think be curious, remember that you don't know everything, and this person probably knows more about themselves than you do. So that's really important. And leadership is something that I think still happens in financial services and probably in lots of professions. When you're looking at who should become your future leaders, remember that times have changed, and what you need in the future is not necessarily what was required in the past, because what society expects evolves, your clients evolve. So coming back to diversity of thought, that's going to become more and more important as people become more and more aware and open with their differences. Leadership should not be, in my opinion, a reward for being a good practitioner or just the career path that's expected. You need to give it to people who want to actually lead and want to help other people thrive. So those would be my takeaways.
Yeah, wise words. Totally agree as well.
Thank you.
Final question then. So, and this is what I ask all guests. So I'm going to give you a magic wand, and this magic wand, you can have one wish only. What would you wish for and why?
This is going to probably sound really cheesy, as I think most big wishes probably should. I would wish that everyone, everywhere, no matter what their circumstances, had joy and belonging. I'm not going to wish for world peace or something like that, because that's, in a practical sense, just probably not possible. But no matter what your circumstance, like coming back to the fact that we were really poor children, we got joy out of some of the most tiny things. And having joy is the most wonderful feeling. And I would just like everyone to experience joy in the way that I sometimes experience joy.
That's a wonderful answer.
Thank you.
It's brilliant. Hazel Bowen, I've been fascinated by this conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for sharing everything. I could go on for hours trying to understand a bit more, and maybe we'll have a follow-up podcast.
That would be lovely.
Yeah, but thank you very much. It's been brilliant.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.